acceptable time. Turn, if you will, to Romans chapter 12 and verse number 2. Romans chapter 12 and verse number 2. Now, I already quoted 2 Corinthians 6:2. We'll go there in a minute. But Romans chapter 12 and verse 2 uses that word acceptable. Knowing what we read at the first verse, that to every time there is a season, or to every purpose there is a season, or everything there is a season. That word fitting time. And a time to every purpose. God has a purpose for everything, and He's in control of everything. And so there is an acceptable time for us to fulfill what God's will is for our life. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, if you'll turn there. Romans 12:2 says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transferred by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove whether it's that good and what? Acceptable and perfect will of God." God will allow you and I to do whatever we choose to do with our time. But the question is, what time is it? With what you are doing with your time, is what you are doing with your time acceptable to God? That's what you need to ask yourself. Is my time being well spent? First of all, am I utilizing, am I redeeming the time? 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15 says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. We flit away all kinds of time. We waste so much time. And so we're to redeem the time. That means from God's perspective, our time is precious. And there are certain things that are acceptable to God to do in the time that He has allotted for us and what He has purposed for us to do. And believe me, there are a lot of unacceptable things that people are doing with their time. 2 Corinthians, turn to 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2. Or chapter 6, verse 2. "For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted," or acceptable. "And in the day of salvation have I succored thee." Now look at this. "Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." There are two words that I hear a lot of people say when I share the gospel. Not now. So the question I would ask is, if not now, when? God's not a high-pressure salesman, folks. He tells us very clearly, "Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day," that's part of time, "may bring forth." Do you know those kids that were coming back from camp in Michigan had no idea that that was their last day of life? Neither did their parents. So do you think how we choose our words and the things we do to each other are important within the acceptable time that God has given to us? Absolutely. Because you never know the last time you're ever going to say, "I love you" to somebody. You never know the last time you're going to be able to encourage somebody, or you're going to be able to say goodbye to somebody, because they may be with Jesus, or they may not be with Jesus. Today, my dad called me. He was thrilled. Not that the man was in the hospital, but he went to visit this afternoon. Went to visit a man that he's been burdened for a long time, and he's tried it before to witness to this man, and he wound up going to the hospital. Probably doesn't have a whole lot more time. and he sat down with him today, and he called me, and I know the man. He called me and he said, son, he said, I got to go through the plan of salvation with him. He received it well, left a tract. Pray that he gets saved. I hope he does. He's way up in years. He's almost 100. But the fact that he listened, God will take us up to the very last moment, the very last breath. My father-in-law, he worked with a man named Lars in his bakery in New York for years and years. And he always would, just would say, Scotty, no, not now, not now, not now. And he got seriously ill. And he got to the place in the hospital that he couldn't talk. My father-in-law went into the room. And he said, Lars, he said, you've heard me talk about Jesus all the time you've known me. If you can hear me, I want to know, would you be willing to invite Christ into your heart? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. He squeezed his hand. He led him in the sinner's prayer to receive Christ. He asked him again after he said, did you pray and ask Jesus into your heart? He squeezed his hand again. Now is the accepted time. Today is the day of salvation. Would God that I wish that I would have had somebody that had the presence of mind to have shared the gospel with me when I was 7. But nobody did. In a Baptist church, walked forward and I stood up front. Nobody dealt with me. That sure would have saved me a lot of heartache from 7 to 14. It's important that people understand the urgency. You know why a lot of people don't get saved is we never press them. We never explain the urgency. We never talk to them. We're afraid about whether or not that they're going to get offended. Well, there's a way you can present things without offending. And maybe they will reject it. John and I, we were out Saturday. We had some good visits. And we had one family that, the lady said, no, thank you, not interested. And she was fairly gracious. When she stands before God, if she doesn't trust Christ one day, she will see that accepted time played back. And so she will not have excuse when she stands before God and God says, you had opportunities. Well, no, I never had an opportunity. Oh, yes. There was a pastor and one of his men that I sent to your door on this day, August 10th. It was about 10:30 in the morning. And you said, no, not now. But there's another not now. And that's living for God. I have so many young people, so many middle-aged adults, so many people that I've pastored. And I've urged people from the pulpit and personally and in my office and in their homes, I've said, I've encouraged them on what to do, spiritually speaking, what to do in serving the Lord, and how to change the things in their life and not allow themselves to get their life in such a mess. But you know what they say? Not now. It's not a good time. Folks, the only acceptable time is now to serve the Lord. Go, if you will, to Ecclesiastes 12. I wasn't planning on this. We're going to wrap it up here shortly, but go to Ecclesiastes. I want the young people to see this. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. In this chapter, Solomon gives the conclusion of his research of everything that there was to do in life and maintaining his wisdom and after giving himself and coming to the conclusion, he says at the end, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter in verse 13 of chapter 12. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. But I want you now to go to verse 1 and I want you to look at what he says. Very second word. Remember now thy Creator. When? In the days of thy youth. While the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. Now let me tell you what I'm talking about, or what God is talking about. Because I've been in ministry long enough that I've made these visits. I make a lot of visits, and I come across a lot of people who knew to do what I'm asking you, what I'm talking about tonight, in the accepted time, doing what God tells you to do immediately. But they didn't. They said, not now, later. They're in 20s, not now, later. And now, they can't see. Now, they're about to die. Now, they're addicted to every kind of thing known to man. Now, they're a mess. We have a man back here, Wayne, who used to be a policeman. You tell me that you haven't seen all these kinds of people. Young people, 20s, 30s, called out every day, every night, all times of the day, because they were told what to do by their parents, told what to do by their preacher. And by the way, most importantly, God. But they said, not now. And their lives are a wreck. And they could never do and will never be what they could have been had they made the decisions now, when they were young, to be what God wanted them to be. So your choice. What time is it? It's an appointed time. What time is it? It's an acceptable time. What time is it? It's an appropriate time. Going back to chapter 3, he lists several things that from his perspective are appropriate. And I want you to understand, this is God speaking here through Solomon. Verse 3, he says a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a fly buzzing. As we were in choir, if it came around the pulpit, I was prepared to kill it. It's a time to kill, okay? It's an insect. There's a time to protect yourself. There's a time of war. There's a time where if man sheds man's blood, by man's blood shall his blood be shed. That is a time to kill. It's not a time to kill and take innocent life for no reason. But there's a time to kill. It's a time to heal. It's a time to help people, a time to jump in and try to save a life and try to work with people. Thank God for medicine. Thank God for doctors and nurses who go into that field and give themselves to the work of trying to heal those who are hurting. It's a time to weep and a time to laugh. Now I want you to listen. There's an appropriate time to do things. We are living in the most inappropriate generation that I have ever seen. They laugh at funerals, and they cry at parties, times that are supposed to be times of rejoicing. People need to learn appropriateness. There's a time to do certain things. He says, there's a time to weep. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn. A time to dance. David danced in front of God's people because the ark of the Lord was coming. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. That is believed to relate to bringing friends or letting friends go. There's an appropriate time for that. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. You know, I love my wife, but I'm not going to plant one on her in the middle of a service. There's a time and a place. Young people, you go anywhere, and it's disgusting. You want to say to the people, get a room. It just doesn't make sense. We don't know appropriateness. God has an accepted time. He has an appointed time. He has an appropriate time for things. Now listen, there's an appropriate time for you to be married. An appropriate time for you to drive a car. What we want to do in life is we want to rush cycles. Have you ever tried to wash clothes and you were in a hurry? And so your machine could be moved, and it just wasn't an automatic cycle. And so you washed it a little bit, then you rinsed it a little bit, and then you rinsed it again a little bit, and then you got the clothes out, and they still smelled like, well, we don't need to go into that. Terrible. You can't rush cycles. You can't rush life. Wait on certain things. Be glad that you are as old as you are now, and don't wish you were older. Be glad that you're still in school. Be glad you're not married. I'm serious. Be glad that you are married. Be glad you don't have kids.